104.7 The Cave, JKLH, Marshfield, Springfield, a proud member of the Kansas City Chiefs radio network.
Touchdown, Kansas City!
Now, it's time for Ned Talk.
I am very chilly today. By the way, this is my 5,463rd broadcast, and that's just today. I've done all those today. Joe Westen, joined by Ned Reynolds and Josh Roberts. It's Ned Talk, an hour of local live sports talk. Ned, I'm empathizing with you today because I'm cold. I just can't seem to warm up.
Nowhere near as old as I am either, and this is not just an old person's affinity. It is cold and very uncomfortable. Did a baseball game last night in Field, and surprisingly, the crowd was close to 3,000. It was listed as over 3,000. It wasn't literally that many, but still, people coming out and weathering the entire evening of about 2 hours and 45 minutes with that wind blowing in from the north. This is rubbish.
Yeah, that is some dedication to baseball. Josh, how are you? What's your temperature today?
I'm feeling okay. I mean, I'm more of a human furnace, so it takes a lot for me to be cold. It's a little chilly today, though.
Keep stoking that fire, brother.
Unseasonably chilly.
All right, we're going to start out today having a conversation because I saw this story and I don't know how much press or pub it's been given over the last few days, but I think it's a major story, and I think that it deserves to have a conversation, and that is 4 NFL players were suspended by the league for gambling. And I just wanted to start out today and have a conversation about this and just kind of see where we land at in our feelings about this sort of thing that's happening. And I'll start with you, Ned. I know you're a guy that likes to bet a few chocolate chips here and there occasionally. You like to.
But I am not a professional athlete.
You're not a professional athlete.
Nor am I betting on my sport, which is what this situation was.
Right.
Now, there's a bit of a technicality involved here because maybe three of the individuals were actually betting on the sport, and they are suspended indefinitely. One, the Jameson Williams kid from Alabama, he did bet. It wasn't on that sport, but he bet on the confines of where, in other words, it was the Detroit Lions training camp or something that the Detroit Lions had an association with, and you're not allowed to do that. So he gets a suspension of, I think, 6 or 7 games.
They said 6 games.
6 is what it is. And then I think the same thing holds true with the Washington Commanders player as well. But the others were betting on football. You can't have that. That's indefinite suspension. It's not the first time this has happened. But you hearken back to the days of Pete Rose when he just absolutely thumbed his nose at the sign that's in every single clubhouse. Well, the same with these players. They say right there, you can't do this. It's not allowed. It's against the rules. And you say, well, I'm above the rules. Oh, no, you're not either. That doesn't happen. So it dates back to, I was in college when Paul Hornung was suspended for a year for gambling on football. As was, now, what's the name of the Detroit Lions defensive player?
Alex Karras.
Alex Karras, also suspended for a year for doing that same thing. So it's not the first time, but fortunately it is a rarity. And then you had the case of the NBA referee back in 2007, 2008, Tim Donaghy.
Yep.
And he was actually shaving points on his games and gone.
There's been a big change in our society over the last, let's say decade. I mean, people have always gambled. Let's not be naive about it in any way, shape, or form, but it's become more prevalent and it's fallen more into the mainstream now than it ever has. I mean, when you watch any sort of sports, there's a line of some sort at the bottom of the screen all the time.
But, Joe, that is for the general public. It is not for any of the athletes, and they know that ahead of time.
Yeah, but my point that I think that I'm trying to make here, Ned, is that we've become over time kind of numb, I guess, to the idea of gambling. It's not a big deal to us anymore as a society. You know, we see more places where people can go to gamble. I mean, there's a place just down the road where people can go gamble. And I know that there's always legislation out there. I know that there's legislation out there for the state of Missouri to allow sportsbook betting. And growing up, same as you, same as Josh here.
Yeah.
Those places weren't legal, and I'm not condemning or condoning either way, but I'm just saying, do you think that this is the start of something that we're going to see more of?
Well, when you take into consideration the fact that it is becoming more public oriented now, yeah, and it's a problem that I think everybody knew might happen. But again, you have those rules in place that these athletes, and they sign it in their contract. You will not violate these particular laws that are involved here. You can't do it. You're facing suspension or maybe even being banned the way Pete Rose was. They know this ahead of time. The public's always been involved in gambling and betting and so forth and so on. Now the objective here is to make it legal so the tax money can be brought into the state, and that's what Missouri's argument is. If there is legalized gambling, the tax money will be used for the betterment, and I think it's earmarked for education in Missouri and maybe in most of the other states as well. There's the key. What they want is to collect that level of revenue and make it work. Does it increase the level of betting? I'm going to argue that it won't. But what it does is make it easier for individuals to place those bets and for the government to get the money out of it. Does it promote gambling? Well, in a sense it does. But again, does it taint any of the sports? Well, Josh, you're an individual who has said, "Hey, that was a fix right there." That accusation is always going to be a case when your favorite team has had something go against it and so forth and so on that appears to be out of the ordinary.
Well, yeah. What I find interesting is, watching hockey, the playoffs this year. Hockey is sponsored by Betway or Betsway, whatever that is. It's on the ice in most of the arenas, and the crawls and the graphics on the screen are sponsored by DraftKings. So hockey, for whatever reason, has kind of embraced the advertising aspect of it a little more than other sports. So my question is, where is this going to lead as far as, yes, if it becomes legal and they can tax it and generate revenue that way, I'm sure the states will do it. But there's going to come a time when there will be some kind of argument for professional athletes to be able to bet in some juncture, probably not ever on their own sport.
That exists
because
now.
They have some kind of, they can influence the outcome of their own sport. That's the whole Pete Rose problem. Mm-hmm. It's not so much that he was, because Pete Rose's argument was, well, I was only betting on my own team to win. But the problem is, if you bet on Tuesday's game to win and you didn't bet on Wednesday's game, you're managing that team quite differently because you have to win Tuesday. You don't care about Wednesday.
Well, the adjunct to that is that, yes, you can. The athletes can bet on other circumstances, but they cannot do it in the confines of their particular organization. For instance, if you're at the Kansas City Chiefs training camp and you are associated with the Kansas City Chiefs in any way, be it player, be it trainer, being an official, you can't place a bet there. But you can go outside that premise and bet on something other than football. Yeah, that is allowed.
Okay.
You can do that sort of thing. It's not taking away one of your freedoms. No, you can. There are just certain legalizations that have to be followed.
Well, they're trying to prevent what happened in 1919 in baseball. The White Sox felt like, the players felt like they were being put upon by Comiskey, so they got paid to lose the World Series.
They dumped their games. They absolutely did.
I know the argument is being made that these guys are millionaires and they don't need the money. But we see this again and again. It just keeps coming up in sports.
Joe, the money isn't the factor with the people who have a lot of money. That's not it. It's the thrill of winning. It's that challenge that faces, hey, I've got more knowledge of the overall all-encompassing level of sports. I'm going to show you how it's done and all that sort of thing. I don't think in the case of wealthy individuals, the money's not even a factor. At least in my opinion, it would not be.
I agree with you. I don't think it's necessarily the money. I think it's the thrill of what they're doing. And that's probably what led them to bet on football, because it was the thrill of breaking the rules and hopefully not getting caught, and they all got caught.
Well, how many individuals challenge legalities in every other than betting? The rules of our society. How many are challenged because I think I can get away with this? that's human nature.
Mm-hmm.
You're listening to Ned Talk, your local live sports talk show. Started out today with a conversation about gambling in sports. 4 NFL players were suspended this week indefinitely for gambling on sports. This comes up every few years, and the conversation that we're having is just simply about whether we think that we're going to see this more or how this affects sports. One of the reasons why Major League Baseball has the rule in place is that the worst thing that can happen to a sport, sorry, Vince McMahon, is that people believe somebody outside the sport has some sort of control over it.
Right.
That it's not a genuine contest between two opposing forces, that instead it is that it's orchestrated somehow.
You cannot violate credibility.
Yep.
If the audience credibility is, in fact, tainted in any way, you've lost it. You've lost the game right there. And, yeah, Joe, I think there's credence to what you say in regards to, does the public begin to lose the credibility factor, the allegiance that they have to a team because there may be something that we don't understand? Yeah, I think that is probably a situation that can occur, but it's always occurred. That's always been the case. Now, will it occur any more with the influx of gambling being made much more acceptable by the public? I don't think so. I think what it does in many respects is not only generate the revenue, but it also may generate more interest in some of these, not necessarily one particular sport, but overall sports by people who might not really give a damn about that. They're, in fact, watching this for a different reason now, but they are associating with what's going on. So there is a positive to it as well. But I do understand where the argument comes in that, yeah, there's going to be a certain level of the public that say, the money's gotten involved and the certain circumstances of organized crime have gotten involved and so forth. Did happen to boxing when I was a kid growing up. Gosh, but that's a little bit more easily controlled because you have individuals. I find it interesting. I was in the Navy at the time, party to viewing Muhammad Ali when he fought Sonny Liston in Maine. Mm-hmm. And Sonny went down. My God, did he even get hit? He just went down, he's out and all that. Well, all of the publications back then, yeah, Muhammad Ali was so fast, it was a lightning punch and all this sort of thing that knocked out Sonny Liston. Well, even when you looked at it, we still don't see anything. Now it's coming to the fore that, yeah, the fix was in and Liston was getting paid for it, was getting a lot of money, and then Liston later allegedly took an overdose of something, and he didn't like needles. And yet the needle was in his arm. Yeah, something's wrong here. So, yeah, from that aspect of things, that's boxing. And, again, it's easily controlled. But with the others where you have numbers of people involved, well, you had the referee in the NBA, Tim Donaghy, and he's out. He's banned forever.
Let me ask you about that. Stop right there and discuss that for a minute and get both your opinions. Do you think with, again, not being Pollyanna here, but organized crime is not what it once was in the United States. I won't say that its back's completely broken, but it's certainly not at the level that it once was in the U.S. But that idea that an individual could be controlled by somebody outside of himself and the sport, do you think that's more likely today or less likely today?
That's one that I can't answer. I'm not involved in that level at all, and I don't know about human nature or anything of that nature, of that level. But no, I wouldn't even guess at something like that. I think human beings can be controlled by anybody or anything, but along those lines, I don't know, Joe.
I would say organized crime is more covert than overt. But it's still there, and they still have a lot of fingers in a lot of pies. And I think money rules all the games. So if there is an opportunity for a less than scrupulous individual to make money off of a sporting event, I think they're going to try. And I think that they are succeeding in a lot more instances than we even know. And you can call me a conspiracy theorist if you want, Ned, but the NFL is fixed.
But again, when would that point have ever been taken if gambling hadn't existed? So there's always going to be some doubt. However, I just can't imagine that it exists on a widespread basis. I'll argue with you there. I don't think that's the case.
Well, I think I don't know if I would call it an urban legend, but there's a story that goes around that Michael Jordan's father was killed over gambling debts and was killed over some things that Michael Jordan had done.
And that goes hand in hand with the idea that the reason Michael Jordan left basketball when he did was because he was about to be banned for gambling, and they told him take a break till this blows over, and that's why he went to play baseball.
But
those two things go hand in hand.
If that had been the case, though, would they have allowed him to become an owner of an NBA team, which he is with the Charlotte team?
He's Michael Jordan.
I
He has generated more money for the NBA than any player in its history.
I will tell you this. I don't know too much about the story of his father's murder, which it was, but the story that existed, he was asleep in the cab of his pickup truck or something, and a couple kids came up and blew him away. That's a little far-fetched, in my opinion. So who knows? But, yeah, I'd heard those stories about the fact that it was gambling debts that haven't been covered. But by the same token, this is Michael Jordan, and he did bet a lot. He did.
Yes.
That was common
Well, I mean,
knowledge.
you look at it and you say that that's the biggest name in the NBA.
Yeah.
Biggest name at that time. He's still probably top 3 biggest name in the NBA right now, even though he doesn't play.
Nobody's an owner.
And he's an owner, but his name comes up in almost every conversation that you have with basketball. If you talk about basketball history, Michael Jordan's name's going to be mentioned. So it touches somebody like Michael Jordan. Obviously, it can touch the third guy off the bench for the New York Knicks. It could touch anybody. And Pete Rose, when he was playing, was the biggest name in baseball.
Yeah. Well, and I'll take it from the aspect of international soccer. International soccer was a disaster with match fixing. FIFA was an organization created to stop the corruption in international soccer. And then they became the corruption of international soccer. So, and that was more, I mean, you're talking about teams, not individuals there. So it is possible to fix games with teams because it was proven in soccer for years. So we can't be naive about this. I mean, there's somebody out there with a lot of money who wants to make a lot more money, who is talking to some big name athlete saying, if you do this for me, I'll make sure you get a bunch of money. Whether or not they agree to do it is something we may never know, but it's happening.
I can't say that it does not happen because I don't have the inner workings on that. But I do find it difficult to believe that a circumstance of that nature could exist with the numbers of individuals who are involved. If, for instance, let's put you in that, hey, I'm going to come to Josh Roberts and I'm going to pay you off, but you're with about 10 or 15 or 20 other guys, and you mean to tell me somebody else is not going to find this out, or the media is not going to find it out?
Right. I mean, and I think eventually it all comes to light, and that's where you're getting like these guys that just got suspended. How long have they actually been betting, and this is just the first time they got caught?
Well, I think it was, relatively speaking, recently. I think it was they bet on games in 2019, 2020. In the NFL, you've got to go through an investigation to prove something like that, and that's what the NFL did. But, yeah, it probably occurred a few years ago.
Right.
It's all very interesting. It's nice to have these conversations about what we think's happening in sports. It's nice to stop and talk about a subject like this. When we come back, we'll talk about something a little less serious. Maybe we'll talk about tag. I don't know. It's Ned Talk, your local live sports talk show. 5,463rd broadcast today.
You're listening to Ned Talk on 104.7 The Cave, part of the Kansas City Chiefs radio network. Back to Ned Talk on 104.7 The Cave, a proud member of the Kansas City Chiefs radio network.
And here we are on a beautiful but a little bit chilly April afternoon talking sports. I'm Westen with Ned Reynolds. Josh Roberts, our 5,463rd broadcast. It's a very special day for all of us. Very special.
It is.
Just thought we'd share that with you.
We're having cake.
And if you're out there,
we can do better than that, can't we?
if you're out there listening and
Rum
you're thinking what they're talking about, maybe you know, blame Ned, not me. I'm just the megaphone for this. Oh, I lied. We were going to talk about something less frivolous, but we continued to talk about betting as we went into the commercial break, and I think we'll spend just a little more time with it. And one of the questions I was going to ask both of you, let's start with, I think it would be easy to control any individual sport. Like you could go to a guy that plays tennis and you could say, look, I want you to throw this match for me and I'll give you $100K.
Right.
And you'd probably be surprised to find out how often that probably actually has happened.
Right.
And any sport like that, you could probably say, yeah, that happens in. But I wanted to ask both of your thoughts. Most likely team sport to be controlled and least likely. Ned?
Well, most likely would probably be basketball, I would think, because most of the bets are not involving winning and losing. They're involving point spreads. Mm-hmm. And that can be controlled. And Mr. Donaghy, the former NBA referee who, when he was incarcerated, got his legs broken. Does that tell you something about who you're calling to the fore? Anyway, that's what he was involved in, the point spreads and the controlling of aspects of the game in which he could, for instance, if a team had a 13.5 point spread in the game, he could bring that down personally. Yeah, I can see it being done in basketball. Now, as far as most difficult, I would think baseball would be virtually impossible. You'd have to get to individuals involved because it's such a large team game. Football, maybe not quite as much, but we're talking about the sordid, the measures of sports that don't fit into the proper aspect and the fan appreciation of the game. It's not something you really like to talk about in regards to how easy or how difficult it might be. But if we have to categorize it, that I would say basketball and the large team sports, baseball and football, would be most difficult.
Josh?
I'll say baseball would be the most difficult because a home run's a home run, a hit is a hit. So the only thing that you could influence other than a player trying is balls and strikes. And those are under such scrutiny anyway. I think it would be a lot more difficult for an umpire to purposely miscall those. However, Ned, I'm going to disagree with you on football because I think that football is fixed, and I think that the way they do it is the way that they penalties, and that's what I've talked to you about before, because the referees can influence the outcome and momentum of a game by when they call these penalties and how frequently. And the thing is, holding happens every play because these players have developed to where they know it doesn't get called all the time, so they do it. It's part of the way that they play the game. Same with illegal contact and pass interference on defense. So they have created a game to where when they need to call these fouls, they can. And so to me, I think it's easier even than basketball at this point for football to be orchestrated.
But Josh, your point about that is that you feel that the NFL controls the game that way, and it's not a betting purpose. It's just to keep the games more interesting.
I think yes. I think yes, but I also think that there is money involved because if I feel like when a game has a certain point spread and one team gets up by a huge margin, the other team always comes back, almost always. And so I think that Vegas is making their money on what the point spreads end up being. But yes, I do believe that the owners of the NFL are doing this in order to get more TV revenue because the games are more interesting and therefore you watch them longer.
Well, then how do you justify a team like the Houston Texans winning almost none of their games, or the Jacksonville Jaguars of many years ago that didn't win, or the Tampa Bay Buccaneers when they started 0-27? How do you justify that?
Well, back when the Tampa Bay Buccaneers were losing all the time, I don't necessarily think that the NFL was doing that. I think this is a fairly recent occurrence in my opinion. But I think the X factor is still the players. Because I don't think the players are involved. I don't think the players are the ones on the take. I think it's the ownership and the officials. So The players play the game, and so there's your X factor. So you're going to have some blowout games. You're going to have some teams that don't perform well just because they don't have the talent to do it, or comparatively. And so I think that's where the rest of that comes from.
Let me throw in another factor for just what it's worth. The media is so much more intense these days than it used to be. You used to have one beat writer cover the Chiefs and one covered the Cardinals and all. Well, now you have all sorts of writers or broadcasters or whomever following these teams. You think something like that could get away without them hearing some kind of perhaps a sordid note about the whole thing going on?
I think that they, because of their admiration for the game, are like you, and they don't want to accept that it's happening.
You mean somebody who has candy canes every day for
Yes, candy canes and chocolate milk.
Well, I mean, we know that this happens organizationally already in sports where teams tank.
Yeah.
They tank.
No, Joe, it hasn't. The suggestion has been made.
No, we're almost. I would say we're almost 100% sure that this happens. There's teams that tank so they can get those draft
Remember
round
that
picks.
year, the Indianapolis Colts? It was called "Suck for Luck." They knew they were going to get the first round draft pick. They knew it was going to be Andrew Luck, and they lost all the rest of their games so that they could get that first round draft.
The NFL has done investigations into teams that are being accused of doing that and never come up with definitive proof. Now, the suggestion is made because all of a sudden they're doing terribly and we want that guy out there. It's not the players. I will tell you the players don't do that at all.
I don't think the players
are
part of it.
Yeah, it could be done theoretically by coaches and by management saying, hey, don't play him today or sit these other guys or whatever. Yeah, I can see that happening, but I really don't think it does.
Well, okay. Let's go back to our conversations that we've had just this year about the Oakland A's. Okay, well, let's think about that for a second because we have, I think, agreed in this room that Oakland is playing poorly to get out of Oakland.
Right.
I'm not going to argue that at all because I think they are. They want to go to Las Vegas.
Yeah.
The organization wants to go to Las Vegas. But have they dictated circumstances where thus and such is not going to play? I don't think that happens. But what they can do in a situation like that is stock your team with lesser players.
Right.
And that they have done. I think their people, Oakland's payroll is something like $30 million. There are individuals who make more than that. So, yeah, from that standpoint, yeah, I wouldn't call it tanking. I would call it more engineering your demise in that particular city.
I think that's splitting hairs just a little bit, don't you?
We're arguing semantics over here.
You see it in the NBA too, where they're,
where
the coach is like, okay, we're not going to play this guy tonight. And then the NBA's had to step in and go, nope, you can't do that.
Well, that did happen the other day, too.
Yeah, that you have to play. And it's disappointing, especially if you're a part of a fan base. Can you imagine being in Oakland right now?
Right.
And they're not playing. They're not putting the best product that they possibly can out on the field. Should that team be allowed to keep their franchise even?
Oh, yeah. You can't do that because you have to have definitive proof of an organization being personally dismantled or not totally doing that because when they do move, which, Joe, is not going to be till 2027, according to all the reports, they have 3 more years in Oakland. Now, I can remember this happening once before with the Milwaukee Braves. They decided in 1965, I think it was, 64, 65, they were going to move, probably to Atlanta. And they played a lame duck year, and maybe, and memory has begun to dissolve a little bit, it may have been a lame duck 2 years, and nobody went to the games. If they drew crowds of 8,500 or 9,000, that was big. So you're taking a risk there of not bringing in any revenue. But times are a little bit different now because every team, and I don't care who they are, you may be the weakest in all, you're still getting a very good payoff from television.
Right.
When we come back, you can bet on what we're going to talk about because I don't know yet. It's Ned Talk.
I'm going to bet that this is your 5,600 and what?
Third broadcast today.
I win.
You're listening to Ned Talk on 104.7 The Cave, part of the Kansas City Chiefs Radio Network. Back to Ned Talk on 104.7 The Cave, a proud member of the Kansas City Chiefs radio network.
We're talking about sports and betting today, tanking, money just in general, and how it affects the things that we love, sports, and just the idea that something that we love so deeply could be controlled outside of the players on the field. That's what we're talking about today. Having an interesting conversation. Ned Reynolds, Josh Roberts, myself, Joe Westen, Ned Talk, your local live sports talk show. This shadow's been over college sports for a long time. Wasn't there a big scandal in the 70s?
Oh, heavens, it dates back to the 1950s.
Yeah.
Early 1950s, when of all programs, the University of Kentucky shut their program down in 1951 because of the taint. Nobody had ever admitted to it, but oh, come on. Yeah, and that was a time when all of the big college games in basketball, I can't literally say all, but 98% of them were played at Madison Square Garden in New York. The whole NIT was played there. Many of the NCAA games, not all of them certainly, because many were played in Kansas City. But it was a time when New York City was the mecca, and you had schools playing big-time basketball that you guys have probably never heard of before. NYU, CCNY, Long Island University, they were big-time powers. They were also big-time on the take. And the federal government found it out. A huge scandal that involved the expulsion of several players and coaches and things like this. Kentucky, under Adolph Rupp, was always going to the Garden to play big games. Kentucky St. John's and Kentucky NYU and Kentucky, and just a lot of games before big crowds. And they were involved and never convicted, but involved to the point where the University of Kentucky shut their program down in 51. And that was with some very big-time stars in that program. Now, they eventually came back. But, yes, it went back to the 1950s. There was one that occurred in the 60s when I was in college, when St. Joe's in Philadelphia got accused of being in on the take, and they were a Final Four team. In the 70s, Boston College, I remember a friend of mine telling me, hey, don't put anything on BC on their basketball because it's under investigation. And sure enough, they were found to have players who were being controlled for point spreads and things like that. So that's nothing new. It has happened before.
Well, and then when I was watching college football, basketball, whatever, those UNLV teams of the late 80s with Larry Johnson and Stacey Augmon and all those guys, I remember watching them thinking, this is like a professional basketball team playing in college. And then a couple of years after, of course, found out that they were getting paid to play.
And how about 1992, when that team that you're talking about with Larry Johnson went to the semifinals, the NCAA semi, and got beat, upset by Duke and right. Bobby Hurley and company. There were some
Fix was in on that game for sure. I will go to my grave saying that UNLV team was paid to lose to that Duke game because those guys, I can still name all of them. It was Anthony Hunt, Greg Anthony, Stacey Augmon, Larry Johnson, and Jensen Ackles. That was their starting five. Those guys all played in the NBA.
The guy from Supernatural?
No, not Jensen Ackles. Something Ackles. What? Something Ackles. It wasn't Jensen Ackles. You're right there. All right, so I can't name all five of them, just four of them.
But you remember the individuals, and you remember the game. Because there was no way that UNLV was going to lose that one. No way they're going to be national champs, and they end up losing in the semifinals like that. Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
There have been, but again, you call into effect here the fact that you're playing top-notch, top-level quality athletics against really skilled people. Anything can happen. So, indeed, that may have figured into it, but it may not have as well.
Right.
It's kind of interesting because for years – if you, up to a certain point, I would say probably, what do you want to say, about 10 years ago, that if you mention the city of Las Vegas in a professional sports team, nope,
right.
Nope, not going to happen. And now all the professional sports franchises are rushing to get teams there.
Yeah.
I mean, we saw it with the Golden Knights. That's a horrible name, by the way. We're seeing it now with the Las Vegas Raiders, but they'll play anywhere that somebody throws up a stadium that they feel like they can make money in. So I wouldn't be surprised if they weren't in Portland in 10 years.
Oh.
And then Major League Baseball is rushing to get Oakland there. Oakland's rushing to get out of there. They purchased land.
It's a done deal.
It's a done deal. So they're going to be gone. We just haven't seen it yet in basketball, but I suppose we probably will.
You mentioned you made a statement there about the Golden Knights being a terrible name. Do you know how the name was brought about?
What did they do? One of those fan picks?
No, it was not. The owner of the pro hockey franchise in Las Vegas is a graduate from West Point, and he wanted to name his team the Black Knights. He wanted to call them the Las Vegas Black Knights, and his alma mater said, "Nuh-uh, that's our nickname." And that's how they got changed. Las Vegas being gold and the Oasis and all that, that's how they got changed to Golden Knights.
Well, and I think the Chicago Blackhawks also were like, hey, that's too close to our name.
Oh, there's perhaps that affinity involved, but it was more the alma mater, the West Point alma mater. I don't think there's any question that Las Vegas now has lost all of that, all of that evil aspect of it that all the pro sports owe. In the NFL, you couldn't even set foot into Las Vegas without some investigator saying, hey, Josh Roberts was in Vegas, we have to suspend him. No, it's gone now with the Raiders being in there, the Golden Knights, probably a baseball team, and I'm quite sure the NBA will follow suit and get in there somewhere along the line. But you have to also understand Las Vegas is not just some little tiny oasis. It is a huge metropolitan area.
Right.
There are 3 million people out there, and they're deserving of certainly major league status.
But my question to you, and this was brought up this last year about the Raiders, is do you ever have a home game there because you have such a transitory population in the city? So is there ever going to be a love for the Raiders? Is there ever going to be a love for the Golden Knights, for the A's, for any NBA team?
As a Chiefs fan, I'll say there's never any love for the Raiders, right?
But, I mean, I don't think the city garners itself well to being a place where people are just diehard that team fans.
On a local level, it'd be like moving the Springfield Cardinals to Branson. It's too much of a transitory population. So how do you get the right amount of support?
Well, I think, guys, you're making an apples and oranges comparison here because I don't think that's going to be the case. Whenever a city gets a major league, and you have to understand now, this differs when you're dealing with minor leagues, but a major league franchise, there are going to be a number of fans who do adopt that as their team because it does carry the city name and it is at the top level of competition. I think the Raiders will bring in a group, and if they don't already exist, of their own fans. Now, I do remember watching the Chiefs playing out there in the regular season, which they will do every year, and the crowd was basically clad in red. But the fact remains that as the Raiders are there, and if they're ever able to gain a certain level of winning percentage, and I think they will in time, but the fact is they'll gain their fan support. That's not going to happen. When you do have a major league franchise, yes, you will have fan identity with it. May not be overwhelming. And I'm really interested to see what Major League Baseball does with the A's franchise when they go into their lame duck years, which in a sense they are right now.
Right.
If there's any form of fixing that goes on in sports, it's where teams go in sports. I mean, you can just tell when cities get hot, and the idea of moving that team to a city is just going to happen. It doesn't matter what anybody else does or whether it's a better fit for somebody to go to another town. If the league has their mind that they need to be in that city, they're going to be there. And to me, the NFL is one of the worst at this. They constantly have teams that do not survive in cities, and then they'll move another team within 10 years into that same city.
Right. Almost like an apology.
Cleveland, Houston, it's just ridiculous. And no other cities are able to get teams because of this. And it's like, why not open this up? This city failed. They didn't have a team that worked there.
Right.
But yeah, we're okay with moving a team back into Baltimore. We're okay with moving a team back into Houston. And we're okay with moving a team back into Cleveland. Let another city have a crack at this. That's my point.
Can't answer it. Don't know.
Yeah.
Don't know
Well,
how
it's
they
money.
operate.
I tend to agree with you. It is all money.
It's all money. That's
Well,
what
but
all this is about.
I think that what you're seeing with like the XFL and the USFL is kind of like a tryout for other cities, maybe in a way, because you've got some different cities that have these teams like Birmingham and teams like that, and that are having some success. I mean, the fan support is not what it would be if it was an NFL team, but it could grow. And I guarantee you that the NFL is looking at those cities and thinking, well, maybe there's enough of a fan base to someday move a team there.
Well, they need to be looking at St. Louis because that's
yeah.
where the biggest support's been at. Come back, we'll tell you about what we're going to watch on TV this afternoon, our 5,463rd broadcast of Ned Talk.
You're listening to Ned Talk on 104.7 The Cave, part of the Kansas City Chiefs radio network. Back to Ned Talk on 104.7 The Cave, a proud member of the Kansas City Chiefs radio network.
Well, this one's one for the archives. It's our 5,462nd. I don't remember what I've been saying all this time.
How many times have we talked about gambling during that time?
It's our archive show.
That's right.
So if you're saving this at home, you're recording it on cassette, archive it. It'll be worth something someday.
It's number one, though. Number one for gambling.
Yeah, it's our number one gambling show. USFL on right now. We've covered the gamut. We should be called the 104.7 The Cave Wide World of Sports.
That's right.
Because we watched women's softball, college baseball. We watched tag for a little bit. And Ned and Josh had never watched it before, and they were into it. They got into it really quickly.
It's fascinating.
Sure, I could wager on it, of course.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
and it's not fixed at all. It's for the love of the game. And then now we're watching USFL football, which is underway. You got two competing startup leagues going on this week in the XFL, which is down to its playoffs.
In a sense, they're competing. This is the virtual start of their season.
Yeah.
And it is not. It's the end of it, the XFL season.
Yeah, today's the last day of the regular season of the XFL.
So if you're a football junkie, which I contend that football fans need the break and don't care about football until it starts again, other than the draft.
Unless you have the draft in your state, which the state of Missouri will have this week.
I was reading this really interesting article online today preparing for the show, and it was that Brett Veach had been told by Lamar Hunt, not Lamar Hunt, but what's his name now? The owner of the Chiefs.
It's the Hunt family.
Is it Lamar? It's no, but what's his? It's
people
are screaming at the radio right now.
Yeah, they are screaming.
It's one of the Hunts. Anyway, he said you can't trade that first round draft pick. You can't trade out of the first round since we're going to be in Kansas City. You can't do that. But he said everything's on the table. There's a possibility the Chiefs could trade up. They could trade out. They could hold pat. So be interesting to see. Mike the intern will be up there for the draft on Thursday. I think he's going back for the Saturday portion of it too. So
Nice.
we'll have a lot to talk about when we're back in the studio next Sunday at noon. Ned, what are you going to watch this afternoon?
Well, both the Cardinals and the Royals are playing out on the West Coast, so their games will start a little bit later on. I have mowing to do, so get out the lawnmower for a while.
It's too cold to mow.
You have an electric mower, don't you?
No.
You have a gas
car,
powered?
but not an electric mower, no.
Well, can't you attach a blade to your car and mow
Good.
it?
I guess could.
fast.
Yeah, that would be nice. What about you, Josh? What are you going to watch?
Hockey. There are 4 hockey games on. Yeah, I know you don't like hockey, but I like it. It's the playoffs.
Playoffs? We're talking about playoffs?
We are. Hockey playoffs.
Playoffs?
The Stanley Cup playoffs.
We're talking about playoffs?
We are. We're not talking about
Thank
talking
God.
about practice.
Thank goodness for Jim Morey that they've got the butt fumble now to play on all the time. Did you think Mark Sanchez just gets really sad just every time that's on? Oh, they've rolled out the butt fumble again.
Fumble.
You think
Isn't
somebody
there a video of him eating a hot dog on the sideline too?
Somebody bet on that there was a butt fumble. All right, guys, we'll see you next Sunday when we're back in the studio for another round of Ned Talk, your local live sports talk show. Thanks to Corbin Campbell. Want to say thanks to Brian Tyndall, Mike the intern, Nick Fury, of course, Josh Roberts, Ned Reynolds. You can download us as a podcast at 1047thecave.com through your Cave smartphone app, or just search out Ned Talk wherever you get your podcast at.